Dunster Castle developed from a Norman fortress into a beautiful country house in the village of Dunster in Somerset, England. The castle sits high up on a rocky tor, and it's been home to 18 generations of the Luttrell family since 1405. Dunster Castle, with its proud history, is arguably one of the National Trust's most haunted properties. Welcome to the Ghosts of Dunster Castle. The remains of the Norman castle lie on a steep 200-foot high hill that looms over the village of Dunster. Several Iron Age forts were established nearby, and an Anglo-Saxon wooden settlement was established at the top of the tor initially. After the Norman invasion in 1066, William the Conqueror rewarded his friend and supporter, William de Mohun, with vast areas of land. He acquired 68 manors across Devon, Dorset and Wiltshire, including 55 manors in Somerset. He was responsible for making the hill itself steeper, but it was his son who began to build a stone castle here. He was a favourite of Empress Matilda and a loyal supporter to her during the war against King Stephen. De Mohun was known as the Scourge of the West due to his frequent acts of plunder and burning in the locality. Stephen's forces surrounded Dunster, but William de Mohun successfully held the castle and even coined his own money here. It may be from this early part of the castle's history that ghostly sounds of clinking coins have been heard, especially at the top of the upper wards, on nights with a full moon. The direct line of succession died out in 1376, and the ownership passed to Lady Elizabeth Luttrell, whose descendants lived at the castle for 6 centuries until 1976, when the castle was donated to the National Trust. Although the Luttrells were not royalists, during the English Civil War, the castle came into possession of the king in 1645 and was held by royalist troops. The parliamentarians battered the castle in an effort to take back Dunster, which was being held by Colonel Wyndham. In May 1645, the future King Charles II stayed at the castle when trying to raise support for the royalist cause. Colonel Robert Blake led a parliamentarian force against Dunster later that year in October. Frustrated by the long resistance of Colonel Wyndham, Blake is said to have dragged Wyndham's mother in front of the cannons and threatened to blast her to bits unless he surrendered. The brave old lady demanded her son to ignore the threat and to do his duty, but Blake reconsidered and backed down. Eventually, after 160 days of bombardment, the castle fell to Cromwell, who ordered the castle to be slighted. The curtain walls were reduced to rubble in 12 days by 300 men in 1650. Every now and again, an elderly proud female figure dressed in mid-17th century clothing stalks the old castle's grounds. She has a haughty look on her face, is silent, and is seen before heavy thunderstorms. Is this Elizabeth, Wyndham's mother, steadfastly guarding Dunster once more? The castle's gatehouse dates back to 1420 and would have been part of the Barbican entrance designed to protect the 13th century gateway to the castle. The right-hand tower contains a dungeon where captive enemies, thieves, murderers and other offenders would be held before trial. Some didn't see freedom again, and during the plague outbreaks in the 1660s, several soldiers at Dunster succumbed to the illness. The dungeon is said to be haunted by the figure of a man who is rather shadow-like in appearance and seems to disappear through the walls and the floor. The oubliette chamber, where prisoners would have been lowered through a trapdoor, forgotten about and left to die, is roughly 7 metres below the floor tiles we see today. During excavations in the 19th century, 3 skeletons were discovered in the pit, and they remain there to this very day. One of them was a 7-foot male, still manacled at the wrists and ankles and chained to the wall. No records exist as to who he was or what he had done to be punished in the oubliette. Could it be that due to his unusual height, he was a threat to those in charge? The average height of a man in the 17th century was roughly 5'3". Is he the shadowy figure flitting about in the dungeon? Next to the dungeon is a well-worn set of stone steps, protected by the original 13th century iron-bound gates. This set of steps leads up to the castle's main entrance, but they seem to stop certain visitors in their tracks. Numerous dogs, including highly trained service dogs, won't place a paw on the steps at all. During broad daylight, the steps can have a distinctly chilly feel. Julian Luttrell, one of the last family members to live at the castle, said that on numerous occasions his well-trained gun dogs refused to ascend the steps, instead taking Mr. Luttrell all around the terrace the long way. The head gardener, speaking in 2008, said he struggled to get his dog to climb the steps too. One of the first rooms visitors to the castle experience is the inner hall. This beautiful space, with its polished wooden floors, elegant artwork and imposing fireplace, was originally the Great Hall, the core of the early 17th century house. The spider's web ceiling and the fireplace overmantel are contemporary to this period. The coat of arms of Thomas and Margaret Luttrell, whose son George built the house, is proudly on display. The gentle piano music and the National Trust guides create a welcoming atmosphere for visitors. The inner hall is said to be haunted by a former volunteer steward by the name of Miss Hooper. Many visitors have reported seeing an elderly lady sitting in the steward's chair next to the lamp or standing near to the dinner gong, who appears and disappears very suddenly. William Wake, the property manager, told a newspaper in 2007, "We get lots of sightings every year. She was a lovely lady who worked here for many years. She used to work in the same room and was highly regarded by the rest of the staff. She eventually retired and later passed away. After that, we had visitors coming to us and complimenting an older lady volunteer. They said she was very helpful and told them all about the room." On hearing such wonderful comments from visitors, Mr. Wake would go to the inner hall to congratulate the guide, but would find the hall empty or occupied by a male volunteer. The woman was nowhere to be seen. Mr. Wake stated, "We can only assume it's our old volunteer who pops in every now and again to chat to the visitors. Could this be the apparition of Miss Hooper, who returns to a place that she loved so much?" The inner hall leads into the dining room, which dates back to the 1680s, with its opulent wooden panelling and mahogany furniture. The plasterwork ceiling, made of lime plaster stiffened with horsehair, includes the date 1681 in Roman numerals to commemorate the date it was put up by Colonel Francis Luttrell and his wife Mary. Whilst the members of the family would entertain their guests here in lavish luxury, behind the scenes the servants worked hard to prepare the exquisite meals. In the nearby Blue Kitchen, a volunteer had a rather disconcerting and inexplicable ghostly encounter. The young man, on work experience at Dunster for 2 weeks, was cleaning in the Blue Kitchen. As he swept the floor, he witnessed a naked foot materialise in the kitchen doorway. He stared at the foot and described it as being almost transparent, but as though covered in a sheer layer of white powder. It had an ankle attached to it, but no more, no shin or calf muscles. To his horror, it took a step forward towards him, then completely disappeared. Understandably, the young man fled from the kitchen, but was badly shaken by the incident. He went on to become a member of staff at the castle, but even today feels unhappy about entering the Blue Kitchen alone. An estate manager named John Wood supervised an evening tour of the castle that was attended by a number of people who were interested in the paranormal, and included some guests who claimed to be psychic mediums and clairvoyants. He said when they went into the Blue Kitchen, several of the guests made contact with a young servant girl who was crouched down inside the dumbwaiter, hoping nobody would see her. John Wood reported, when the mediums opened the hatch to her hiding place, a piercing scream was heard on the other side of the castle. Was there an accident connected to the dumbwaiter that cut short her life at Dunster Castle? Visitors who ascend the beautiful oak and elm staircase that dates back to the 1680s will begin to enter the most active area of the castle, the first floor, with its beautiful morning room, wisteria and East Quantock's Head bedrooms. In time, visitors reach the Leather Gallery, named after its impressive leather panels that tell the love story of Roman General Antony and Egyptian Queen Cleopatra. The unique leather hangings were well suited for dining rooms, as they did not retain the smell of stale food to the extent of regular tapestries. The leather hangings were probably made in the Netherlands in the late 17th century and are thought to have been first hung at Dunster between 1705 and 1741. This gallery formed part of the medieval castle's Great Hall and once extended through into what is now the property manager's flat. It is arguably the most active area of the castle, along with its neighbouring King Charles bedroom, with people reporting various encounters on a regular basis. In 1990, the property manager and his wife moved into the flat just next to the Leather Gallery. For a short while, his mother came to stay with the couple and was staying in the East Quantock's Head suite, just next to the Leather Gallery. She had gone to bed one particular evening and was reading around 11:30 when she could distinctly hear male voices coming from the Leather Gallery. Assuming it was her son, she thought about going to ask him something that had been on her mind, but decided against it, thinking it might be her son talking to another colleague. The following day, at breakfast, she asked her son the question and explained that she had thought about asking him the night before when he was in the Leather Gallery. He looked surprised and informed her that he'd been in the flat all evening. Later that day, he asked a colleague if he had been in the gallery at 11:30, but he explained that he'd gone to bed at 10:30 in a different part of the castle, well away from the Leather Gallery, and had not been to the Leather Gallery at any point that evening. There was nobody else in the castle. On another occasion, the property manager's brother-in-law was staying in the East Quantock's Head suite when he heard the sound of a door banging rather abruptly at 11:40 p.m. His sister was staying in the flat, and both thought the other was playing a trick on them. They both heard heavy footsteps and low muffled voices of a group of men. Both felt too scared to investigate. The following day, they realised they'd both experienced the strange phenomena at the same time. Since that day, a number of people sleeping in the East Quantock's Head suite have heard the same sounds at the same time. Muffled male voices, deep in conversations, footsteps and banging doors. one guest reported a presence in the actual bedroom itself. On a Thursday in August 1995, a very hot summer's day, at 8:30 in the morning, Faye Barringer-Capp was cleaning in the leather gallery. She had already vacuumed the floor and was in the process of using an electric polishing machine to buff the wooden floorboards. It was hard and hot work, and the sunlight was intense. But as she continued working and moved towards the window, she became aware that the temperature had dropped to the point where she became icy cold. The hairs on the back of Faye's neck stood up, and despite the noise of the buffing, she distinctly felt she was not alone. Faye knew the other members of the cleaning staff were elsewhere. She turned around to see a shadowy figure of a man at the top of the oak staircase. He was dressed in a very old-fashioned military uniform. This wasn't First or Second World War, this was from many centuries earlier. He wasn't a solid human being, and although she said she could see through him, Faye was still able to see what he was wearing. She turned away and continued with her task, believing the noise from the cleaning would drive any apparition away. About 30 seconds later, she became conscious that the room had become warm again, and she was convinced he'd gone. Faye believes he appeared simply to find out who the new cleaner was and didn't mean any harm. A possible explanation for this strange occurrence could be linked to the morning room, just along the corridor from the leather gallery. It was used in the Civil War as a dormitory for troops garrisoned here in the mid-17th century. A number of visitors have reported seeing what they believed was a costume guide standing in the leather gallery. A guest named Jackie, on a trip to Dunster Castle organised as an outing for her choir, witnessed a man dressed as a Cavalier soldier standing in the corridor as visitors enter the gallery. Her friend James worked at the castle, and she asked him if there were any costume guides during the day. He confirmed there were not. She described the Cavalier's appearance perfectly, and James knew he'd not shared any information about this apparition. It is thought a Cavalier was shot in the head in the castle grounds whilst the castle was besieged by parliamentarian forces, and that he died in the leather gallery at a later date. Workmen employed at Dunster Castle have been subjected to ghostly activity when they least expect it. During renovations in the 1950s, 2 workmen had to lift floorboards in the leather gallery to access heating pipes. Both men felt a dreadful sense of foreboding and terror to the point where the young apprentice experienced such unpleasant nausea he had to leave the room. Unable to complete the task, the men halted the activity halfway through. The apprentice regained his composure, but was so convinced that something sinister was lurking in the leather gallery, he refused to go back into the room. A different workman was employed to complete the task, but he didn't experience any adverse effects. The King Charles bedroom takes its name from the future King Charles II, who as Prince of Wales slept here in 1645 when trying to raise support for the royalist cause in the West Country. Near the fireplace is a bed-warming pan made for this visit and inscribed with "God Save King Charles." Just behind the bed, on the left, is a small hidden passage which, according to the castle's history, led to a secret ladder that enabled a quick escape. The passage is now blocked off. In 1993, a volunteer named David Bryan was on duty in the leather gallery and the King Charles bedroom. Because the National Trust was slightly short-staffed that day, he agreed to oversee both rooms. As there's only one entrance into the King Charles bedroom, which stems from the leather gallery, Mr. Bryan positioned himself in the doorway between the 2 rooms. A man in a rather old-fashioned grey lounge suit, who appeared somewhat more smartly dressed than most visitors to the castle, passed through the leather gallery, walked past Mr. Bryan and went into the King Charles bedroom. After 10 minutes, Mr. Bryan was puzzled as to where the visitor had gone. He went into the King Charles bedroom, but nobody was in there. He looked in the cupboard and the secret passage, thinking someone was playing a prank on him, but there was nobody present. The visitor would have had to have walked past Mr. Bryan to leave the King Charles bedroom. On several occasions, visitors have refused to go into the King Charles bedroom, because they sense a presence or entity that makes them uncomfortable. One lady fainted next to the bed, and when she became conscious, she declared that the incident was due to a presence. Another guide, named June Kopp, was in the leather gallery talking to another steward. She felt something brush across her hip, but there was nothing there. Later that day, a clairvoyant found a cold spot in the King Charles bedroom, and another cold spot precisely where June Kopp felt something on her hip. One woman saw what appeared to be a body on the bed in the King Charles room and left in absolute terror. The oak staircase that leads from the leather gallery down to the library passage is Dunster's secondary staircase on the north side of the castle. Staff and visitors have often felt uneasy about this staircase, and on occasions the banisters appear to be coated in an unknown substance that feels wet and slippery even in hot weather. Visitors have fled to wash their hands. The house steward's flat is located near this staircase, and at one point, concerned about the sense of foreboding and unpleasant atmosphere, she approached a religious figure who attempted to exorcise the evil spirits from the staircase. The presence of several spirits were recorded in the vicinity of the staircase and in the drawing room below. A number of visitors and staff have witnessed a lady in grey gliding up and down this staircase. Some believe this is Colonel Wyndham's mother, others think it's Anne Luttrell, but others believe it's the ghost of a servant who haunts the oak staircase. According to Julian Luttrell, one of the last residents of the castle, 2 guests staying with the Luttrell family witnessed the same female figure on the staircase at separate times. On both occasions, the guests were descending the staircase to attend dinner. Retired Admiral of the Fleet, Sir James Somerville, saw what he believed to be a servant coming up the stairs. This may have been possible, but her clothes looked rather old-fashioned, more akin to the 17th century, and unlike the staff he'd seen at Dunster. He asked Julian Luttrell's mother, who was hosting at the time, "Who did I see on the oak staircase?" Mrs. Luttrell's response was, "I have no idea. There's no one in the house at the moment." On a separate occasion, Colonel Frederick Leicester witnessed what appears to be the same figure, in the same clothing, on the staircase as he came down to dinner. There were 25 years between these sightings, and neither Sir James Somerville and Colonel Leicester knew one another and wouldn't have known of each other's experiences. A corridor from the oak staircase leads onto the library passage. Some feel they are being watched or followed in this area, and others feel cold and uncomfortable and need to get out of the library passage rather quickly. The library, in my opinion, is the most striking room at Dunster Castle. In July 2011, a guide named Ivor was on duty in the library when a rather strange incident happened. Ivor witnessed a man enter from the library passage in a hurry. He went straight through the library, without looking at it, through to the conservatory and went outside onto the terrace. Ivor was concerned the man was perhaps ill. Just a few minutes later, the man re-entered into the conservatory, rushed back through the library in more of a hurry, headed down the library passage and turned left onto the oak staircase. Ivor didn't have a clue what was happening, but then the man came into the library once more, looking distraught, and this time he reported he'd had a nasty experience. Ivor got the man to sit on a chair and collect himself for a moment. A few minutes later, he said to Ivor that he'd just had a very odd experience. The visitor reported that as he came out of the leather gallery and as he descended the oak staircase, a little girl grabbed him by the hand and said, "We've got to go out right now." She ran down the stairs with him, through the library and out onto the terrace. He felt he had to go with her, as he was afraid she'd lost her parents. When they got outside, he looked around, but there was no sign of any parents or anyone else at that time. And then the little girl turned to him and said, "We've got to go back right now." So back they went, and as they were ascending the oak staircase, they met a lady dressed in grey. The man thought she must have been a nanny, a nurse, or possibly the girl's mother. The lady in grey on the stairs spoke to the little girl and said, "There you are, come along," and they both vanished. This completely unnerved the visitor. It appears from his testimony that he encountered 2 ghosts. The castle's gift shop is located inside the impressive 17th century stables. The Luttrells were keen hunters and polo players, and Dunster Castle even had its own polo ground. Winston Churchill played polo here, and in 1879 the Prince of Wales, later King Edward VII, stayed at Dunster for 2 days of hunting on Exmoor. The stable block and shop appear to be somewhat prone to paranormal activity. On several occasions, staff have witnessed a man dressed in green who walks through the door of the shop and along the stable block, where he disappears without a trace. Another member of staff witnessed a man in the far left corner of the shop. He wore a tight-fitting grey jerkin and a loose rag scarf around his neck. As a member of staff approached the man, he vanished. Could he have been a soldier or someone employed in the stables themselves? A shop manager also witnessed an unusual green light that floated from the front door of the shop to the rear of the stable block. Inside the shop, many visitors have reported feeling unwell and on edge. Stock items that are perfectly secure 1 minute often fall over as if invisible hands have given an almighty shove. This happens predominantly with piles of books that are carefully stacked at the end of the shop. Just opposite the shop's entrance is a stockroom. Staff have reported feeling uncomfortable in here, as though they are being watched. Unopened boxes of stock stored in the room have been ruined by a mysterious brown sticky gunge, which is discovered inside the packets themselves. When returned to the suppliers for investigation, no explanation for the mysterious substance is given. The stable area can feel quite oppressive, and on 5 separate occasions, visitors who have felt unwell have asked if anyone had been murdered there. One lady was adamant that 2 people had been murdered in this area. A few years ago, a private ghost tour was organised for some staff who worked in offices in Taunton. Many of the group were sceptical, but having had a few drinks before the tour, they were happy to attend. As they stood in the stables, laughing, joking and making ghost-like noises, a lump of masonry, the size of a ping-pong ball, fell from the ceiling, struck the end stall and landed at their feet. Seconds later, another piece of masonry fell. This time it hit the neighbouring stall. Even the most dismissive of the group were disturbed by the incident, and many of them fled from the stables. In January, I visited Dunster Castle for the first time and I absolutely loved it. It reminded me a little bit of Cardiff Castle, which I covered in a previous video. And if you do get a chance to go to Dunster Castle, I would say definitely go. It's quite a hilly site, I will say that, so wear comfortable shoes and you could definitely spend an entire day there. For this video, I try to take you on a journey through the castle that follows the route that the National Trust suggests to visitors. After we exited the castle, we walked along the terrace and the pathway takes you down past the crypt. Now, the crypt is part of the servants' quarters, and this is where dry goods, meat and produce would have been received, and they were also used for storing coal. If you look at any books about Dunster Castle, none of them mention anything from what I've read about the crypt being haunted at all. It's one of the last rooms that most visitors will see as they exit the castle. And you can see the entrance to the crypt on the left-hand side of this photograph, and then of course on the right-hand side you've got the steps leading up to the castle. As you enter the crypt, which in no way feels creepy at all, to be honest, on the very far left side, I don't know if you can see this green light, there's an exhibition about ghosts at the castle with some stories that you can listen to, and many of those I've weaved into this video in my own words. So I had a look around there and took some photographs and filmed some footage of this area. And then I walked across the crypt to the opposite side. So you can see from this image where the ghost exhibition is, and then the green arrow represents where I walked across to that sort of triangular little room where there's an exhibition in 2 rooms, one either side. By this time, I think Mr. GC and I were the only people in the crypt itself, and I headed over, filming the whole way, and I walked into the room on the left, which has a TV set and shows videos of the castle, and then the room on the right has an exhibition about bats and wildlife. And I had not stepped into the bat room at that point, and there was nobody in the TV room, so I came back out, and Mr. GC was looking at a display about 6 feet from me, and he was on my right-hand side. I was about to step into the bat room straight ahead of me when I stopped really suddenly and thought to myself, there's someone in there. And I completely froze. And I was convinced there was somebody in that room. I don't know why, I had a problem with it. Then, to the left of me and immediately next to my left ear, I heard a very loud, definitely male, quite nasal, long exhale. And this is not going to be a great impression, but I'll do my best. It went like this. I turned to Mr. GC and I said, I just heard someone breathe in my ear. And he came over and I turned back to my left to see if there was anybody standing there. And there wasn't. And then again, right next to my left ear again, I heard the same thing, whatever it was, made a really long sniffing sound as if someone or something was sniffing my neck. And it was like this. And it was a really long, horrible sniff, and it scared the living daylights out of me. It really, really did. I turned to Mr. GC and I said to him, did you hear that? Somebody just sniffed my neck. And he said, I didn't hear it. And I grabbed him. I hadn't stepped into the bat room at this point. I grabbed Mr. GC by his left arm and pulled him towards the bat room, and I pushed him in there a little bit, and he stepped in and said, I said, is there someone in there? And he said, no, there's nobody in here. So I stepped into the room at that point. I quickly got the iPad and pressed record because it had stopped, and this is the footage I filmed, and I was pretty nervous when I filmed this. And again, I said to Mr. GC, did you not hear it? I heard somebody breathe on my left ear and then somebody sniffed me. And he said, no, I didn't hear it. And I kept repeating the sound and I felt really unnerved at this point and I wanted to leave. And he looked around the bat room and said he thought the noise may have come from outside. Now, it's a possibility that the noise could have come from outside, as there's a sort of barred window, and on the other side of that, just a few metres away, are the steps up to the castle. So if I was to put my hand through those bars, you would see it if you were ascending the steps in this sort of little window that you can see to the left of this pillar. But when we were in the room, it was completely silent. Nobody ascended the steps because the steps are stone, and when people go up them, you can hear their footwear, even if they're wearing trainers. if it did come from outside, then it's quite a way for the sound to travel, and I would have thought I would have heard it with both ears, but I'm not convinced it was from outside. I hadn't actually stepped into the room, and it was just next to my left ear, as though somebody was directly behind me and had leant over my shoulder, like when you try and make somebody jump, and it definitely did that to me. Just to be clear, I didn't feel anything or sense anybody physically next to me, but to experience that breath and then the sniff, it was really horrible. It really, really was. Anyhow, we left the crypt and went up the steps to the Tenants' Hall cafe, and I'm sat drinking a cup of tea and spilling my crisps, and he's eating cake and drinking a latte, and I don't think we spoke very much, and I really was a bit shaken by this, so we left the castle and headed back to where we were staying. A few days later, I got the iPad out of my bag to have a look at the footage, and as I went through the gallery, I got to the crypt part, and I found I have next to no footage. Absolutely diddly squat. I've got some sort of weird green footage from the Ghost Stories area, and some photographs from there, but the film I made walking across to the TV and bat room was gone, except for 2 seconds worth of footage, and I'll play this 2 seconds for you. Be warned, blink and you'll miss it. I'll play that again for you. And that is all I have from this incident. I have no idea where that footage has gone. So you see me move the iPad from my left to my right where Mr. GC is, and I'm saying, I just heard. And I was saying, I just heard someone breathe in my ear. And then the footage cuts out with a sort of snapping sound. And I was beyond cross that that was all I had. And the other thing to say is that that section is mid-film. There's no way I could have recreated that or pressed the red button to record. That might take a second, and then when you finish the video, you press the button again. That is definitely a section of footage. And this is a brand new iPad. I only bought it in September from Apple. It's not cellular, it's not on Wi-Fi, and it also has masses of unused storage space. And I bought it to film, and that's what I use it for. And even Mr. GC says that this loss of footage is weird because he'd seen me filming bits and pieces at the castle all day with no problems. And he saw me walking across and filming, which is why I went to film the TV room first, and he stayed behind me not to be in the shot. After this incident, I emailed the National Trust and relayed what had happened to me, and I got a reply. And it seems that other people have experienced some strange things in the crypt. And in the email it said, "This is such an interesting experience in the crypt. We have had people in the past say they've had their hair pulled when nobody was near them, as well as hearing voices and a general feeling of being uncomfortable and not being welcome." Well, I didn't have my hair pulled that day, and it wasn't so much a voice but a breath and a presence, and I definitely felt uncomfortable, and I'm not sure I would go back in that crypt anytime soon. There's one more thing to say here, which is that I have a channel about ghosts, and of course I was going to film in the crypt to share it with you, and I was so disappointed to see all this footage was missing. And I've been to so many National Trust properties and not experienced a thing ever. And the other thing to say is that in no way am I a medium, a psychic, or in any way able to claim to communicate with the dead. I'm just a regular visitor. But what do you think? I mean, I can still hear that voice, that exhale and sniffing. Even today, it really creeped me out. But do you think it is an external noise? Is there some mileage in that? It's a possibility. But it was right next to my left ear. It was horrible. The only other thing to say is that I took some photographs while we were in the library and in the conservatory and as we were leaving. And as you go through the library and the conservatory, you can also go into the drawing room, which is at the far end of the corridor. Mr. GC had gone out onto the terrace at this point, and I went into the drawing room, which is all very lovely, and I was taking photographs in there, and I took a picture down the corridor to the library, and I've got a slightly mysterious looking figure in it. I don't know whether it's an actual person, but the guide that we spoke to was definitely the front side of the rope, and whatever this is in this image is on the opposite side of the rope, and I do not know if this is a person or something else. I've got no idea. I only spotted this figure while I was making this video, actually. I've got one postcard for you today, and it's quite modern. It's from 1984, and it says, "Quite an interesting place shown on this postcard, unusually historical for this part of the country." Well, I think that's a bit debatable. "The village where we are staying is miles from anywhere and only about 6 houses. No pub, no church. Don't mind about the church." And I love that, from Dave. This is our gatehouse for Dunster Castle.
Yeah. Oh, from the original. Oh.
I'm recording. This is the gatehouse, which was built in 1420, and inside it there is supposedly an oubliette, so I think we're going to go and have a little look. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the Ghosts of Dunster Castle. I hope you enjoyed hearing about my experience. Let me know in the comments section what you think. And thank you for watching as ever, and please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Take care, guys.